You may not have heard of Thomas Lugert. That wouldn't hurt his feelings. In fact, he wishes no one had ever heard of him. In Project 9, Persuasive Power from the Competent Communicator Manual, Lloyd Smith will discuss the odd events that made Thomas Lugert more well-known than he wanted to be. He'll also explain how all of us can prevent any other Thomas Lugerts from becoming well-known. Join me and welcome.
Let's deal with the obvious question first. Who on earth is Thomas Lugert? Well, I'm glad you asked. Thomas Lugert is a relatively young, I think he's probably about 35 or 40-year-old German computer scientist. He's a consultant who works in network applications and designing systems and that sort of thing. So what, you may be asking? Well, we're going to hear the answer to that. Lugert was an interesting guy in a way. He graduated from college in Germany, and then in 1998 he heard about a new program that Columbia University in New York City had for English language immersion for foreign students. Now, Columbia was doing that to make money. Most colleges have English language immersion programs, and they make a tremendous profit off of them. But Lugert thought this would be a classic way to come to the U.S. for a year and enjoy the cultural experience, and also to perfect his English so that he could become more successful in his career. So he did. He enrolled in Columbia University's English language immersion program, enjoyed his year, went back to Germany, and got started with his business. Now let's leave Mr. Lugert behind a little bit and flash forward to 2012. You may recall that that was the heyday of the so-called birther movement, the people who believed that President Obama was not born inside the U.S. and therefore was not eligible to be President of the United States. There was a lot of controversy about his birth certificate, remember, all this stuff about Hawaii and that kind of stuff. I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about something a little bit different. One of the things that came up among the birthers was a scan, a picture that appeared online of Obama's supposed foreign student ID card from Columbia University. And I happen to have that picture right here. The idea was that the president had enrolled in Columbia not as an American, but as a foreign student. Now, President Obama went to Columbia. He actually started in Occidental College near Los Angeles, transferred to Columbia when he was a junior, and then graduated in 1981. Okay? Now, when you get this, look at the picture at the top. This is the scan of the president's supposed foreign student card. This looks like a pretty good student ID card. If you were in college somewhere recently, you probably had a card similar to this. And you'll notice here that the name there is Barry Soetoro. Okay, who is that? Well, when Obama's mother, or when Obama was about 6 years old, his mother married an Indonesian guy named somebody or other, Soetoro. And they moved to Indonesia. And when Obama was down there, he enrolled in elementary school in Indonesia. He was 6. He started school there. He stayed there about 3 years, give or take, until his mom decided to come home and enroll in the graduate anthropology program at the University of Washington. She and her husband divorced at that point. The reason why Obama was called Soetoro for his last name was that the Indonesian school system didn't allow kids to have last names that were different from their parents' last name. And since his mother's name was Soetoro at that point, he was too. Now, there are several things that are very interesting about this. When this appeared online, everybody said, see, it's proof he was a foreign student when he was at Columbia. Not exactly. Look at the picture down below, a different student ID card. Our man Thomas Lugert has come back on the scene. This is his actual student ID card from when he was at Columbia in 1998. Now, what has happened here is obviously whoever created the forgery of the Obama card at the top simply scanned Mr. Lugert's card and altered it. There are two ways to know that. One of them is that the card number there, right below the name, is the same on both cards.
Oh, no.
Okay? See, it ends with 4355 on both of them. The other way, you can't really tell by just glancing at it, but the barcode is the same on both cards as well. Okay? Now, how do we know this is a forgery? There are several ways to know it. One of them is that Columbia University did not introduce this barcode version of their student ID card until 1996. Obama had graduated in 1981. When they introduced this, they had in mind that it would be a single ID card that could be used everywhere on campus: library, meals, vending machines, whatever, washing machines even. They wanted a single uniform system. People could just load money on their card and then take it off in the copy machines or whatever. The other thing that makes this clearly a forgery is that Columbia never had a system of identifying foreign students. Notice Mr. Lugert's card there on the bottom says student. Well, he was a German national. He was there enrolled in their English language immersion program. They didn't, at Columbia there were only two kinds of cards. One said student and the other one said faculty. And they didn't care. Columbia's a private college, and so everybody pays the same fee anyway. There are no extra fees for out-of-country students. Now, what does this show us? Okay, first of all, it's a clumsy forgery. It caused a big stir at the time, but it's clearly fake. But how do we prevent ourselves from falling for things like this? That's a serious issue because so many things are much harder to detect than that, which was extremely simple. The answer is a principle of science called Occam's razor, and that's actually the topic of my speech. Okay? Occam's razor is the notion that when there are multiple explanations for something, the simplest one is more likely to be true than anything that's more complicated. If you think about real life, that's generally the truth. The simplest way to explain something is much more likely to be so than the more complicated way. Occam's razor is named after a guy named William of Ockham who died in the middle 1300s. He was a British monk who hit on the notion. And so the basic idea is this: when you see something that looks odd, and this so-called foreign ID card for the president certainly did look odd, what's the simplest explanation? Simplest explanation is that it's a fake. A much more complicated explanation is that he was somehow masquerading himself as a foreigner. The same is true for things like the Kennedy assassination or the idea that the moon landings were all faked and filmed in a basement in Chicago, which I confess I actually told some of my students the first year I was teaching caused a certain amount of unpleasantness for me. But in any event, it seemed like such an obvious joke, nobody could believe it. Well, no offense, but students are gullible, especially high school students. Anyway, the point is, when you're faced with something odd, think about our man, William of Ockham. The simplest explanation for something is much more likely to be true than any more complicated explanation. Oh, Mr. Toastmaster, I lost track of you.